Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today, we explore the M41 Walker Bulldog in the Cold War, and the crews and opponents who gave it its reputation. If you enjoy learning how technology, tactics, and human decisions come together in combat, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. It is the early 1970s along the dusty Laotian border, and an M41 Walker Bulldog light tank is climbing a low rise hard enough to make its torsion bars shudder. The four-man South Vietnamese crew feels every bounce as the tank crests the ridge, its gasoline engine howling in their ears while they peer through periscopes and sights at a tree line that should be quiet. Instead, boxy shapes are moving among the trunks, the outlines of enemy tanks edging into view. The commander barks corrections into his throat microphone, voice barely cutting through the roar of the power pack behind him. Arsenal is the Friday feature of Dispatch, U.S. Military History magazine. Inside the turret, the air is cramped and hot, with every surface close enough to bruise a shoulder or elbow. The loader braces his boots, grabs a 76mm round from the ready rack, and slams it into the open breech as brass casings clatter under his feet. The gunner rides the powered traverse, hands tight on the controls as he tries to keep a weaving enemy tank centered in his telescopic sight while red tracer fire scratches through the dust outside. These light tanks were built to scout, to move ahead, to peek and slip away before heavier guns could find them. On this day, there is no room for that kind of work. Out in front of the ridge, the Bulldog's first shot flies just over the target, kicking up a burst of earth behind the enemy hull. The second round connects with a dull flash against the armor of a Soviet-built tank, and for a heartbeat, the crew feels the lift of success. Heavier guns answer at once, shells tearing up the ground nearby and showering dirt and rock fragments across the Bulldog's thin steel plates. Inside, the crew works the turret as fast as they dare, loading and firing, using their mobility and quick-firing gun to trade blows with opponents that can kill them with a single well-placed hit. In that moment, the promise and compromise built into the M41 are exposed with painful clarity. To understand why this tank exists at all, you have to step back to the years just after the Second World War. The United States Army went into those final campaigns with the M24 Chaffee as its main light tank, a nimble machine whose 75mm gun and thin armor were just adequate for late-war reconnaissance. By 1945, it was already clear that any future confrontation with the Soviet Union would pit American armor against tanks like the T-34 and what came after it. A light tank that could only observe and then race away would no longer be enough. The battlefield had changed. Post-war doctrine called for a light tank that could move quickly with mechanized forces, push ahead of heavier formations, and still carry a gun with at least a fighting chance against enemy armor. At the same time, the new vehicle had to be light enough for air and rail transport and simple enough that existing factories and depots could build and maintain it without reinventing every tool. The old Chaffee fleet was wearing out, its parts aging and its armament already behind the curve of foreign development. Armored officers wanted a replacement that could keep up with modern battlefields without turning into a full-sized medium tank in disguise. Budget cuts and peacetime habits slowed that search, stretching development across a series of experimental designs. Engineers worked through the T-37 concept and then the T-41, trying different turrets, gun mounts, and fire control arrangements in search of the right combination of firepower, protection, and weight. They wrestled with the same trade-offs that haunted every light tank program, trying to give crews enough gun and armor to matter without losing the mobility that made such tanks valuable. The outbreak of the Korean War shocked the system awake, as reports of brutal terrain and hard-fought armored clashes underscored the need for something better. Out of that pressure came a compact, fast 76mm gun tank that would enter service as the M41, a Cold War tool for armed reconnaissance pushed rapidly from drawing board into production. From that pressure-filled design process, the Walker Bulldog moved from an idea on paper to a real tank built in steel. In the late 1940s, designers focused on the T-37 concept, a compact light tank that could outgun the aging M24 without becoming so heavy that it lost the ability to move easily by air or rail across oceans. They experimented with different turrets, gun mounts, and fire control layouts, looking for a 76mm gun that could threaten contemporary Soviet medium tanks while still sitting on a chassis that mechanics already understood. Out of that work came the T-41, essentially a second phase of the same idea, with a refined gun installation and a hull reshaped to provide better internal volume and a little more protection where crews needed it most. The Korean War did not design the M41, but it gave the program a sense of urgency it had lacked. Reports from the fighting described rough terrain, rushed movements, and cramped supply lines where a fast tank with a hard-hitting gun would be a real asset instead of a luxury. In response, the Ordnance Department pushed the T-41E1 into standardization, and Cadillac brought its production experience to bear to turn drawings into finished vehicles. Between 1951 and 1954, more than 5,000 Bulldogs rolled off the line, a remarkable number for a light tank in the early Cold War. In United States service, the tank entered the books as the 76mm gun tank M41, later gaining the Walker Bulldog name in honor of General Walton Walker. At a glance, the new machine was a classic early Cold War light tank. It carried a four-man crew in a welded steel hull and turret, with a high-velocity 76mm gun as its primary armament. The Walker Bulldog served mainly with the United States Army through the 1950s and 1960s, before spreading widely through military aid programs to allies in Asia, Latin America, and other regions. Weighing under 25 tons and powered by a gasoline engine of roughly 500 horsepower, it could reach road speeds that made it one of the fastest tanks of its day. That speed came at a price in heavy fuel consumption and thin armor that could not ignore modern anti-tank weapons. By the time the United States retired the Bulldog from frontline duty in the late 1960s, it had fulfilled the role planners originally imagined and exposed the limits of that vision. It served as the light tank slot in armored divisions, led columns on exercises and intense Cold War standoffs, and became a visible symbol of American support when shipped abroad. As an export tool, it allowed Washington to strengthen friendly armies quickly with a standardized, well-understood vehicle. The same mix of speed, firepower, and vulnerability that emerged from the design board followed the M41 into every jungle valley and border skirmish where it later fought under foreign flags. Seen up close, the Walker Bulldog presents a compact and purposeful shape. The hull is a welded steel box with a sharply sloped glacis plate at the front to help deflect incoming fire, and 5 medium-sized road wheels on each side carry the track over torsion bars and hydraulic shock absorbers. Tall exhaust pipes at the rear corners give the tank a distinctive outline when viewed from behind or in profile. Under the rear deck lives a Continental air-cooled gasoline engine linked to a cross-drive transmission, a combination that gives the Bulldog brisk acceleration and a high top speed on roads. Crews remember that torsion bars and shocks worked hard to tame the ride, yet the tank still bounced and lurched when pushed across rough ground. Inside, the layout follows the mid-century American pattern. The driver sits at the front left of the hull, entering through his own hatch and looking out through several periscopes embedded in the roof armor. Directly beneath his feet, an emergency escape hatch offers a second way out, a comforting detail in a machine whose thin armor could let splinters and spall into the crew space. Behind the driver, a bulkhead separates the fighting compartment from the engine bay, where the power pack fills the rear of the hull with noise and heat that seep forward. The rest of the crew works in the turret basket, a rotating platform suspended over the hull floor as the turret turns. The turret itself is built from a mix of cast and welded steel, compact in footprint but tall enough to give the commander a decent view when standing in his cupola on the right side. Below him, also on the right, sits the gunner, hands on his traverse and elevation controls, eye pressed to a telescopic sight that links him to the 76mm gun. On the left, the loader occupies a space crowded with ammunition racks, the breech of the main gun, and the roof hatch he uses to bring in fresh rounds from outside. Over their heads, the commander's cupola is ringed with vision blocks and, on many vehicles, carries a heavy machine gun mount used both for local defense and as a limited anti-aircraft weapon. The result is a turret that packs a great deal of capability into a small volume. In training manuals, the Bulldog's crew workflow reads like a neat diagram. The driver keeps the tank moving and presents the hull. The commander scans the terrain and calls targets. The gunner lays and fires the main gun, and the loader feeds shells in a steady rhythm. In the field, especially in hot climates such as Vietnam, those clear boundaries blur under heat and fatigue. The low-profile turret that helps keep the tank harder to hit also means elbows collide, ammunition racks sit very close to bodies, and every crew member feels the turret swing in their knees and backs. Each time the main gun recoils, it shakes the entire vehicle, and spent shell casings pile up underfoot, becoming another hazard as the fight goes on. The Bulldog subsystems reflect the priority given to speed and firepower over comfort and long-term endurance. Its 76mm gun uses a vertical sliding breech and a recoil system designed to bring the barrel back on target quickly so that the gunner can fire again without a long delay. A coaxial machine gun mounted beside the main armament and a heavy machine gun on the roof provide close range and anti-infantry firepower when the tank supports troops or fights in built-up areas. The turret traverse system is powered and quick, able to spin the turret through a full circle in roughly 10 seconds when the mechanism is healthy, a trait crews valued in ambush country where threats could appear from any direction. What the Walker Bulldog lacks are the thicker armor plates, advanced stabilization, and relatively spacious crew stations that would come with later generations of tanks. Veterans often describe it as a machine that was quick to accelerate and, if hit in the wrong place, quick to burn. A tank that you could learn to fight from but never entirely relax inside. The M41's first harsh test came not in a global war, but on a lonely Cuban beach in 1961. A small armored force of anti-Castro exiles, trained in secret and equipped with 5 Walker Bulldogs, rolled ashore during the Bay of Pigs invasion. Instructors had drilled them in how to use speed, rapid turret traverse, and the 76mm gun to offset their thin armor, and for a brief window, it worked. Their tanks engaged Soviet-built T-34s along a narrow coastal road, using quick shots and rapid repositioning to knock out several enemy vehicles before heavier forces could react. For a moment, this light tank seemed to punch far above its weight and match the confidence that had been designed into it. That early success could not make up for the larger plan's weaknesses. Without sustained air support, robust logistics, or a secure beachhead, the exiles' M41s ran short of ammunition and fuel and found themselves isolated, surrounded by enemy armor and infantry. As the invasion collapsed, many of the Bulldogs were abandoned or captured, stark reminders that even a well-handled light tank cannot carry an operation on its back. In the hands of the United States Army, the Walker Bulldog never fought as part of a full-scale armored thrust, but its life as an export tank ensured it would see plenty of combat elsewhere. Those later fights did more than any training brochure to define its reputation. In Vietnam, the Walker Bulldog found its main war. Delivered in large numbers from the mid-1960s onward, M41s became the primary tanks of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, replacing worn-out Chaffees in frontline units. South Vietnamese crews took to the Bulldog quickly, appreciating its responsive controls, fast turret, and a gun that finally gave them a credible chance against enemy armor. During Operation Lam Son 719 in 1971, M41 units crossed into Laos alongside armored personnel carriers and airborne infantry, tasked with disrupting the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There, they ran into North Vietnamese formations equipped with T-54s and PT-76 amphibious tanks, producing some of the first major tank-on-tank battles of the conflict. Accounts from those fights describe Walker Bulldogs using hull-down positions and quick relocation to engage heavier opponents, scoring multiple kills when they could work the flanks and use terrain. At the same time, crews suffered heavily from mines, rocket-propelled grenades, and accurate return fire from heavier guns that could defeat their thin armor. Later, during the 1972 Easter Offensive and the final campaigns of 1975, many South Vietnamese crews manned M41s from dug-in positions, their light tanks used as static gun platforms to stiffen fragile defensive lines. This tactic traded away mobility, leaving the Bulldogs more vulnerable to flanking moves and anti-tank guided missiles, but in city streets and choke points, their fast-firing guns still mattered. By the end of the war, hundreds of Walker Bulldogs had been destroyed, abandoned, or captured. Yet veterans on both sides remembered them as hard-fighting machines that kept showing up on new fronts as the Cold War's proxy battles flared. What crews liked most about the M41 was obvious from the first drive. It was quick, with a power-to-weight ratio that made it leap forward on roads and scramble through broken ground where heavier tanks bogged down. The 76mm gun, while not the last word in tank killing, offered high-velocity rounds that could damage or destroy many contemporary threats from the flank or at moderate ranges. Commanders appreciated a turret that traversed rapidly, allowing gunners to swing onto new threats faster than many opponents. And maintainers valued the automotive systems as familiar evolutions of existing American practice rather than exotic experiments. For many South Vietnamese crews, the cramped turret was tolerable because the tank felt lively and responsive compared to older designs they had known. The price of that performance was vulnerability the crews could never ignore. To keep weight down, the designers had accepted modest armor thickness, enough to stop small arms fire and shell fragments, but not enough to shrug off modern anti-tank guns, high-explosive rounds, or shaped charge weapons. As Soviet designs evolved, newer medium and main battle tanks increasingly outclassed the Bulldog in both firepower and protection, especially from the front. Its gasoline engine consumed fuel at a high rate and produced a distinctive exhaust signature and noise that made the tank easier to detect, while its limited range constrained operations without strong logistical support. When M41s were dug in and used as static strongpoints, they surrendered the one advantage they could never spare, their mobility, and became easier targets for guided missiles and flanking armor. Enemies learned quickly what to fear and what to exploit. Infantry units facing the Walker Bulldog respected its rapid fire support and coaxial machine gun, especially when it appeared suddenly to break up assaults in villages or on narrow roads. Tank crews, on the other side, understood that a careless flank or rear exposure could end badly if an M41 lay in wait nearby. At the same time, commanders facing formations of Bulldogs prioritized artillery, anti-tank missiles, and heavier armor to break their positions from a distance. Compared with later light tanks and armored reconnaissance vehicles, the Walker Bulldog occupies a middle ground, more heavily armed than many scouts, more mobile than most medium tanks of its era, yet increasingly out of place as battlefield threats grew deadlier. Over its service life, the basic M41 spawned a small family of variants as armies tried to stretch the usefulness of a solid but aging design. Early on, incremental changes produced the M41A1 and M41A2, refining internal systems and addressing teething issues without transforming the tank's overall character. Later production standardized as the M41A3, the version most widely exported under American military assistance programs and the one that filled armored battalions from Europe to Southeast Asia. In these forms, the Walker Bulldog populated reconnaissance and tank battalions from Denmark to South Vietnam, each user adapting the tank's employment to local terrain, doctrine, and political circumstances. As the decades passed, several countries undertook deeper rebuilds to keep their bulldogs relevant. Brazil fielded upgraded versions commonly known as M41B and M41C, combining diesel engines, improved fire control, and in some cases a 90mm gun to restore effectiveness against newer armored threats. Uruguay's M41A1 UR similarly received local improvements, while Taiwan developed the M41D program, modernizing engines, optics, and electronics to keep its fleet viable into the late Cold War and beyond. These upgrades reflected a shared judgment. The Bulldog's chassis and basic layout were sound enough to justify further investment when budgets or politics made outright replacement difficult. In many of these armies, the upgraded Bulldogs stayed in frontline or reserve roles long after the design had left American service. Inside the United States, the M41's evolutionary path ended with replacement rather than radical conversion. By the late 1960s, planners concluded that a new light tank was needed, one that offered better air portability and a more effective main weapon against modern armor. The result was the M551 Sheridan, a very different and controversial answer to the light tank question that used a large gun and missile system in a lightly armored hull. As Sheridans entered service, Bulldogs left American frontline units, their future increasingly tied to foreign users and upgrade programs rather than new domestic development. The Walker Bulldog story in American hands closed quietly, compared to its dramatic service under other flags. The Walker Bulldog's legacy lies less in one famous battle and more in the way it bridged eras. It embodied the first serious post-war attempt to create a modern light tank for armed reconnaissance, combining a relatively powerful gun with high mobility in a compact hull. Lessons from its use, and from its limits, shaped later thinking about what light armor should try to do and what missions it should avoid. The constant tension between wanting a tank that can scout, fight, deploy quickly, and still survive on a battlefield crowded with heavy weapons runs through every light tank design debate that followed. In that sense, the M41 helped define the questions even when later vehicles tried to answer them differently. On the ground, its influence is visible in the armies that used it for decades. In South Vietnam, it formed the backbone of an armored corps that fought a long and difficult war under increasingly desperate conditions. In Brazil, Taiwan, and several Latin American and African states, it served as the first truly modern tank for crews who had previously known only older Second World War designs or light armored cars. Exported Bulldogs helped train generations of officers and mechanics, built up local industry's ability to overhaul and upgrade armored vehicles, and provided the backbone for national defense plans long after the United States had moved on. Even today, a small number of upgraded examples remain in service or in reserve forces, proof that a well-understood machine can outlive its designer's original expectations. For those who want to see a Walker Bulldog in person, museum and memorial examples are scattered across several continents. In the United States, visitors can find them at institutions such as the 1st Division Museum in Illinois or at the museum at Fort Meade in Maryland, where preserved tanks show the compact hull and turret details up close. Other examples sit in outdoor displays at military vehicle collections and as gate guards on bases, including restored machines at regional museums that focus on Cold War armor and training. Photographs and video walkthroughs, the kind often highlighted in dispatch features and on trackpads platforms, offer additional ways to explore the vehicle's interior and hear from those who served on it. However you encounter it, the M41 Walker Bulldog stands as a reminder that behind every fast-moving silhouette on a distant ridgeline are crews making split-second decisions inside steel boxes whose design shapes their odds of coming home. The same balance of speed, firepower, and vulnerability that defined this light tank continues to echo in the choices engineers and commanders make about modern reconnaissance and light armor. You can also hear narrated versions of Arsenal features as part of the Trackpad's podcast feeds and Dispatch audio editions, carrying stories like the Walker Bulldogs from the printed page into the listener's ear.